Today is Friday, January 17th, 2014, and we are in Bellingham, Massachusetts. This tape is part of the Bellingham Mendon Veterans Oral History Project. My name is Marjorie Turner Holman. Our cameraman is Eric Fisher of ABMI Cable 8 TV. We are privileged to have with us today Bruce W. Lord of Bellingham, Massachusetts. Bruce, I'm going to ask you just to restate your name for me and give us the hometown that you came from.
My name is Bruce Lord. I come from Ipswich, up in the North Shore of Massachusetts. My family was from Ipswich for 350 years. It's an interesting date today, by the way, January 17th. 46 years ago today, I landed at Vung Tau on the shores of Vietnam. So this is an anniversary of sorts.
Well, thank you for sharing it with us. All right. Do you have any family members who served in the military?
My family, I'm from a family of 5 boys. My oldest brother, Ken, quit high school in 1944 to enter the Navy during World War II and stayed in the Navy long enough to serve in the Korean War time frame. Never was in combat. My third oldest brother, John, joined the Army in 1952 and spent a year going up and down the peninsula in Korea in some rather heavy traffic. My next brother, Dean, entered the Marines in about 1954 and was involved in some of the South American conflicts in Venezuela and Guatemala and some fairly active work. My fourth brother wasn't in the service at all. He got married and never got in, and I was in Vietnam.
Okay. All right. Now, you are married?
I am married. I went to the University of Massachusetts, met my wife there, and a couple of weeks after we got out of college, we got married in Hyannis, and we've been married 50 years next June.
Okay. And any children?
And we have 2 children, 45, and Jennifer was born in 1967 when I was in Vietnam for 6 months. Matthew was born in 1970.
Okay. And could you tell us what you were doing before you went into the service?
When I got out of college, I got a job as a insurance adjuster. I worked in New York City for a few months. Then when my company realized I was getting married, they moved me to New Haven, and I was there when I got drafted in 1965. I was 25 when I got drafted.
So you had already finished college?
I had already finished college. I was married and living happily because I never expected to get drafted at that stage of my life.
Okay. I think, did that have anything to do with the lottery, or had they started the draft lottery yet?
We were under the draft board. There was no lottery. The draft board decided who they wanted to draft and who didn't, and my draft board decided that they were going to pursue me until they got me, and they finally did. I was inducted in New Haven, Connecticut. I went to Fort Bragg for basic training, stayed at Fort Bragg for advanced training. I had to learn to type, believe it or not, and in the Army, even though I'd already had several years of typing when I was working in college. Then we were stationed at Fort Bragg. We were sent to Fort Bragg and found out when we got there that our company, which is a personal service company, which means basically an administrative records keeping company for the individual people, was being formed to go to Vietnam. There were 120 of us who formed up there, and in December of 1966, we took the last ship out of Oakland to Vietnam. After that, all personnel was sent by airplane.
Okay.
We had 20 wonderful days on the Pacific Ocean.
I got ahead. You got a little bit ahead. Tell us what branch of service you served in.
I was in the U.S. Army. I was drafted, a 2-year commitment. I decided to take the 2-year commitment rather than go for OCS, where I could probably have spent another 3 or 4 years in the Army. At the time, I thought it would keep me from going to Vietnam. As it turned out, it didn't make any difference.
Okay. And you started telling us about boot camp. Can you tell us anything about your experiences of boot camp?
Other than that I didn't like it, not too much, really.
And there's our first picture of
There's
you.
your first picture. That was whatever. As I said, I was at Fort Bragg. My wife was living in New Haven. She used to come down on weekends and visit, and that was what we did. When we went to Fort Bragg, that was entirely different. She drove from New Haven to Richmond, and I thumbed a ride from Fort Bragg to Richmond to meet her. And then we drove down. We lived in a small little town called Bonnie Doon, North Carolina, or outside of Fayetteville. And she got a job at Methodist University and stayed there until Thanksgiving of '66, and she came home, and supposedly I was leaving the 1st of December, but we left on December 28th, 1966, which happened to be my birthday. So, you know, all these anniversaries just all kind of go together.
Sounds like they do. And now tell us about where you were deployed to and for how long.
Well, we formed up as a company. One of the quirks of our company is that we had what they called a computer section, which was a trailer full of computers, the first one to be going to Vietnam, and it was a small company. And what we found when we got to Vietnam is that we were assigned to what's called the First Log Command, which was the logistics people of the country, and they wanted our computers, and they didn't particularly want the personnel. The end result is the computers were temporarily transferred to them, and we were as a company added to the 44th Med Brigade. 44th Med Brigade was in charge of all of the hospitals, evac hospitals, MASH hospitals throughout Vietnam, everything except the combat medics and what have you. So our people we were serving were throughout the countryside. When we first got there, the records were sitting in a storeroom in cardboard boxes on the floor, and what we had to do was take those records and find out where all of these hospitals and companies were. That was our first task. This 120 personnel company soon grew to be about 250 people, totally outside all the limits of the Army, but they seemed to get along with us. And we were assigned at various sections. I was originally assigned to Saigon, where we lived in a compound, totally outside the military. We were in a compound that looks somewhat like a hotel, although it really wasn't. It had showers and, you know, two-person rooms. The showers were not. You could take a shower there and come out dirtier than when you went in. So we had to establish separate facilities. We were overlooking a cemetery, which, if we'd been there a year later, we could have watched the Tet Offensive in Saigon. We stayed in Saigon for about, I think, from January until April. In April, we moved to an area called Long Binh. Long Binh was the area that the...
There's the photo we have of your...
That's the photo of my house in where I lived in Long Binh.
And it says the Lord's house.
The Lord's house. I have that in my office. That sign that was put up by some friends, and I took it when I left, so I still have it. Mm-hmm. That was typical compound. We lived first in tents when we got to Long Bihn. We lived in huge, what I call circus tents. Then we moved to temporarily to aluminum buildings, and finally got to our own area where we had these wooden-sided, sided buildings. I don't know. I think there were 25 people to a building, something of that sort. And we basically took care of the hospitals, etc. In the beginning, there was a lot of traveling involved because we had to find hospitals.
Well, that's what you were telling me about accounting for the MASH units. This is a picture.
That's the main hospital in Long Bihn. Essentially, it served two purposes. Essentially, this was a permanent installation. Long Bihn, when we got there, was being constructed. It didn't exist before, I think, probably 65, and when we were there, it was just barely getting there. This particular hospital served as the unit handling mainly the more severely injured, and also the immediate people who were getting injured nearby. It had a helicopter pad with a considerable amount of space there. I used to work there at night periodically, doing whatever needed to be done, and it was quite an operation. The medevac helicopters I also used to go from hospital to hospital to find out where they were. Essentially what we had to do was, where we thought there was a hospital, we had to go there, find out who the personnel was that were existing in the hospital, and then come back and set up their records so that they could get their regular pay monthly and do whatever needed to be done on a personnel basis.
So things were still so confusing that you didn't even know where all these hospitals were, or these
Well, first
MASH
of all, we
units.
didn't know where anything was because we didn't know what the heck the names of these places were. But the medevac helicopters and the pilots were very good about providing us space on their operations and getting us to where we wanted to go. I mean, I found hospitals in the Mekong Delta, and I visited hospitals in Pleiku, so we were all over. My company of 120, which, as I said, probably doubled in growth, had separate units in Quinnon and in Nha Trang and in Cam Bay, so that we covered a lot of the area with these various units. In April of 67, we changed our commanding officer. The one we had was a lieutenant who didn't really know too much about what he was doing and was basically incompetent. We got in a Captain Fuller, who unfortunately died last November, who handled the operation of the company in a much better manner and was able to get around dealing with people and made the whole stay a lot more enjoyable, although it was never particularly enjoyable. We were not a combat unit. We did not get into combat. The nearest I got to combat was periodically at a hospital if they're monitoring the area or something of that type. So we weren't really in danger. The only real combat veteran that I knew that died there was one of my fraternity brothers from college. So, we weren't dealing with casualties that we knew. The casualties that I met were people who were in the hospital already, and I was just visiting and going around and talking to.
One of the things you talked to me about was the newsletter that you created, and
Well, because we were such a spread out unit.
Here's a picture
yeah.
of one of them with a Snoopy
with my cartoon. With the spread out unit, the CO of the new CO when he came in, I got along very well with him, and he gave me assignments that were somewhat different than most everybody else. In other words, I basically became his troubleshooter when he had a problem. that needed to be handled, he sent me out to do it. And we discussed what to do about communicating. After I got out of high school, I spent a year as a newspaper reporter, and he suggested that maybe I could write a newsletter, which I did, a legal-sized newsletter on 2 sides, done every Sunday. I would go in Sunday morning and type out on a Spirit duplicator sheet 2 sides of a newsletter, and then somebody would run it off, and I think we sent out about 400 copies a week to the various sections of the company. I understand it became fairly popular in the United States because a lot of the men sent it home. So it was meant as something to tell people where everybody was, to give some advice relative to the jobs they were doing, and to kind of give some perspective to what we were doing. I was fortunate in that the people who were supposed to be overseeing it either did not understand the double entendre or overlooked it. So we had a reasonably good time with it.
You said that you knew that things were getting sent home and that you had to be mindful of that at times.
Well, the problem was obviously if it was sent home to somebody who knew somebody else, you certainly didn't want to be saying something about somebody that would get back to their wives, families, etc. Mm-hmm. So we were able to evade that, and as far as I know, caused no divorces.
Okay. You talked about some of the things you enjoyed doing on your time off, specifically the zoo.
Well, in theory, we had a 10-hour day. It didn't always work in theory. We had a lot of freedom. They didn't really clamp down. This was the early part of the buildup. I mean, 66 and 67 was the main buildup in Vietnam, the amount of troops coming in. When we were in Saigon, when we were off duty, we had passes. We could go anywhere we really wanted to do. So that I spent a lot of time in Saigon going to the various places. Everybody knows Tudo Street. Tudo Street was the street where the restaurants were, and a lot of other things. So we spent time there, but we also wandered around the various buildings. I think I mentioned to you they had a beautiful zoo there.
Yep, there's a picture of you at the zoo.
And it was, well, you can see the fake picture and the wonderful haircut. I enjoyed the zoo. Saigon was known as the Paris of the East. It was a very beautiful city. Not necessarily when we were there, but you could see what it was. And one of the as I said, one of the wonderful things about it was it had a great zoo. It had one area, it had a big clock on the ground that kept good time. Mm. And it had a lot of animals, and it was nice just to be able to walk through and kind of see people in their way they lived with their kids and everything, going through the park and what have you. We ate. The interesting thing in Saigon is we ate off the economy to some extent. Every morning we'd get in trucks and drive over to the headquarters of the 44th Med Brigade, where they had a kitchen set up, and we would sit at 2 or 4 man tables and be served by wonderful people, and do the same thing at lunch and dinner. At one point, they decided that we would go to a regular Army installation set up where they had the regular Army buffet type of eating conditions, and that was in Cholon, which was probably about 10 miles away from our compound. And our compound, by the way, was about 2 miles from Townsend Airport. We went over to Cholon for 4 days, and on the 5th day we went over there as we were turning the corner to go up to it was a restaurant style situation. As we did that, the front of the building blew out. So we no longer spent our time there. We went in another direction.
Okay.
There were often these little incidents in the time frame that's there that occurred. It was not unusual to be downtown Saigon and seeing a monk in his orange costume go out to the middle of the road, sit down, pour gasoline over himself, and light a match. That happened 3 or 4 times. We did, however, find a golf course, and there was also a racetrack there. The racetrack had an interesting manner of wagering. You had to pick the top 3 in each race, and you had to win the top 3 in each race to win. And it was so rare that anybody would do that that the money would pile up over several days and weeks. Mm-hmm. So when somebody finally won, they got a considerable package. There was a golf course that was more like a field than anything else, but they did have it cut, and they did have greens and fairways, and so we went over and played that a couple of times. We stopped playing that one day when the people ahead of us, a gentleman ahead, putted his ball from a fairly long distance into the hole, and the hole blew up. So we decided that we no longer wanted to golf.
Right.
But these are just some of the things. When we got to Long Binh, we went out to Benoit, which was nearby, and we could spend the evening, have a dinner there, or do whatever. So we had a lot of freedom during this time. As I understand it, after that, the amount of freedom that these soldiers had was reduced considerably, but we were there. Mm-hmm. Now, Long Binh itself was an interesting place because I'm not a great admirer of the military, and Long Binh was a perfect example of why not. They had to have their bureaucratic buildup. They made this huge base out of nothing, put up all sorts of installations and roadways and what have you. And it was basically for the bureaucrats, which I was. That's what we were doing. While there were people out in the woods fighting, we were sitting there in relatively comfort. While I was there in '67, they installed an Olympic-sized swimming pool. They installed tennis courts. They had volleyball courts. They had movie theaters. So it was almost like living in the United States on a base. One of the interesting things is in the afternoon you would hear this little ringing of a bell, and the ice cream truck would come around giving out ice cream.
Oh, no kidding.
Just another wonderful little deal. Mm-hmm. The most of the work, the nice thing was most of the work was done by Vietnamese. I mean, by that I mean the polishing of the shoes, the cleaning of the rooms, the washing of the clothes, etc. That was all done. So we didn't have any of that work. The hard part was we were living with outdoor latrines, anything from a 1-holer to a 6-holer. Our shower was outside with cold running water, and this was the conditions we were living in. Okay. The other problem was we couldn't drink the water because the water that the Vietnamese had was poison to almost everybody except the Vietnamese.
You mentioned something about the black market. and the
The black
Saigon
market.
docks. Could you tell us a little
Well,
bit
the
about?
wonderful thing about Vietnam,
And here's a picture of the Saigon
yeah,
docks.
that's the Saigon docks. Everything came in there in Cam Bay. The one of the problems the Army had is that the military people who were in charge, particularly the NCOs, non-commissioned officers, were leftovers from World War II and Korean War. They had been in the service for a lot of years and they knew all the ins and outs. They were not the greatest, most reputable people in the world, and the docks, the shipment of U.S. goods into the military had a lot of holes. As an example, we had our own vehicles, and as with most everything in the military, everything had to be kept up. Trucks had to be painted and things had to be done. We found that it was easier and cheaper to go to the black market downtown Saigon. The black market was any market in any store that was was in the city, and you could buy paint there cheaper than you could do it by driving over to the regular supply and requisitioning it. And that was true with a lot of things. As it was easier to buy it off the black market than it was to get it through supply. We were not very good about keeping on track of our own items.
I seem to remember there was something about some refrigerators, or did you mention something? There was.
I don't know the refrigerators. There was anything you wanted to get. As I said, it was easier to get off the market than it was because, first of all, there was very little paperwork. Second of all, there was very little cost. The military, the Vietnamese did not charge a lot for much of anything. But it was an interesting system. Not very efficient, but it was interesting.
Okay. You started talking about some of the living conditions, and you gave us some pictures about those. If you could talk just a little bit more.
Okay, this particular picture that you see now is when we were first in Saigon. This was our compound. This is looking off to the side. Right behind us was a cemetery. 1 year later, if you'd been here and during Tet, you would have seen tanks coming across that cemetery.
During the Tet offensive.
Yes.
Yeah.
The people directly to the left of that picture, that was a Chinese section, and they were very friendly. We talked to them as best we could, considering neither of us understood what the other was saying. But they used to invite us over for meals, and they would be having their little barbecue, and we were very tempted to go over until we found out that their barbecue was their dog, and we decided we didn't really want to do that.
You also gave us a picture of the shower areas and.
Okay, this is well. If you look to the left, those are the rooms. Each of those little sections is two-man rooms. The building down at the very bottom of the picture is our shower room. You'd have to walk from your compound down to the shower room, and we actually had hot water down there, so that's where we did what we wanted. There was also a water truck down there where you could get water. Not very good, not very tasty, but it was better than the shower in the building. We had a girl come in every day who would clean the room and do our laundry and do our boots and what have you. It was very nice. When we moved to Long Binh, we got away from the luxury and moved into tents. These were huge, looked like circus tents, but we lived in those for a period of time. Fortunately, by the time the monsoons came, we'd moved into these wooden buildings.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you next, was about the monsoons and that you went through a typhoon.
The monsoons were something that I never saw before and probably never will again.
And That's what you were living in.
Yeah, those were the living quarters that we had. One of the wonderful little side duties we had was going out to the sand piles, and each one of those little green bags had to be filled with sand. So we would periodically have details going out to do that, and they were placed around the buildings in case somebody attacked us. I never understood how sandbags halfway up the building was going to stop a mortar from coming in from the top, but they felt that was safe.
You started talking to us a little bit about some of the experiences. You talked about the being on the golf course and somebody's things. Tell us some of the things that made it clear to you that you were in a war zone.
Well, you know, one of the problems with this particular war was that everybody felt guilty. I mean, it was a guilt war. If you were in combat, you felt guilty because of what you were doing. There was no front lines. I mean, there were no, you know, they would go and they would take a hill and and lose it the same, you know, take the hill and then be withdrawn, and the people would go back to where they were before. So the combat people felt guilty for not being able to do much of anything, not accomplishing what they thought they were doing. The people who were support were feeling guilty because they were not in combat and saw what was going on. So it was an entirely, nobody was happy. You know, we did what we could to keep ourselves occupied. But it was a very strange existence because nobody really knew what was going on. I don't think the military knew what was going on. There was an intermix of everybody. I mean, one night we went downtown in Saigon and found the Air France Hotel and went up to the top floor to the bar up there, which we didn't know anything about. It was a beautiful building, brand new. We're sitting in this nice bar up there, and suddenly a waiter comes over and suggests that we were not supposed to be there, that this was a place where people from the CIA and people from the embassy, etc., were meeting. So we left. But it was a different area. I mean, one of the things I met through somebody I met at the zoo. I met a professor from Saigon University, and I was able to spend some time with him. He invited me out, and I went to his house for dinner, and I talked to him very much, and he explained. I mean, he was very much in favor of what we were doing, but he explained that we were going to lose, which we did. And the reason we were going to lose is because the Vietnamese had been at war since 1940. The people out in the fields, the farmers and their rice paddies, their only concern was that they got the rice in the ground and that they got the rice out of the ground. They weren't concerned with who was there. It didn't affect them who the government was. They just didn't want people firing over their heads or killing them. The government of Vietnam, we were constantly attempting to get people who were honest into the government. As he said, there were no such people in Vietnam, that the traditions were the people in government got what they got and took what they took. And he said there was never going to ever be any difference because there was no will, despite what we'd been hearing from everybody. There was no will of the people to actually care. Ho Chi Minh, who was head of the North Vietnamese, was just as well known in the South and just as admired in the South as he was in the North, because he'd been fighting for freedom for 40 years. So I mean, and he turned out to be right. I mean, this was exactly our problem. We were fighting a useless war.
Uh, Tell us about something positive that you took from this experience after, I know the negatives.
Something positive. Well, the main positive is that when I got home, I had a 6-month-old daughter. That was certainly a positive.
And we have a picture of you headed home, I believe.
Yeah, well, the interesting thing about that is we had gone over as 120 strong. In all of the buildup of the company, when it came down to, you rotated it on a yearly basis. I mean, supposedly you were there for 12 months and then you rotated out. The problem we had is that we had 70 people still there who had come over the year before and were supposed to rotate all on the same day. Now, our CO had worked very diligently to replace us and had started a couple of months in advance doing that, which left at some point in time 70 people with very little to do. It's to some extent it was like a fraternity. I mean, we had our little friendships and whatever, and from the viewpoint of our officers, we were kind of a pain in the neck. So our CO came to us one day. One of our jobs was handling records and getting people their R&R and getting people their rides home and this stuff, so that we had very good connections. The picture you saw was the the company that got people out. Okay, they did the work of getting all the paperwork together and getting them home. And because of our situation, we were very friendly with a lot of these people. So our people who handled getting tickets went to them and said, look, we've got 70 people, we'd like to all go on the same airplane, how can we do this? And their answer was, our CO would like a better Jeep. That's a little difficult, except that in the military nothing is impossible. After hearing this, the next day we all had our tickets. Our CO unfortunately went out to take his ride to headquarters and found that he didn't have a ride because his Jeep had disappeared. He had a sense of humor. I mean, he must say he realized that what he told us was to go and get our tickets, and he knew exactly what had happened. So he came to us again and he said, look, I expect a Jeep here tomorrow morning. I don't care where it comes from, whose it is, but I want a Jeep here. So, the military in its great wisdom does not provide keys to its Jeeps. You have a little thing you just turn on and the thing goes. So in order to protect it, everybody had a chain that they would chain the wheel to something on the car and on the Jeep and use that to hold it. So a couple of our motor pool people went down into Saigon the next morning with a can of green paint and our stencil and a pair of wire cutters. So consequently, within a very short period of time, somebody's Jeep had their chains cut and the numbers on the back repainted and the stencil of our company put on it. So we got our thing back. The advantage is that we got home. We were supposed to be home on December 28th of 1967. We actually got home on December 18th of that year. We left. It was an interesting thing. We flew out of Benoit by they were using private charters, airline planes. And the interesting thing about that is that we left at probably 4 o'clock in the afternoon on the 17th, and we landed at 4 o'clock the next morning on the 17th in Oakland via a nonstop plane that was going from Benoit to Oakland. Was nonstop to Formosa, and nonstop to Tokyo, and nonstop to Anchorage, and nonstop to Portland, and nonstop to Oakland. We seemed to have problems with the plane, but it did make it.
Well, that leads me into the next question about what happened. Tell us about what happened when you were discharged, when you came back to the
Well,
US.
the first thing you have to understand, this was the 60s. And the 60s were, in my experience, and obviously I have a lot of decades to look at, the 60s was a decade that was extremely unusual. I mean, the old system that I grew up with disappeared. You had the Kennedy assassination, you had Vietnam, you had other things. The problem is that the life we left in December of 66 was not there when we got back in December of 67. The world had changed. You hear a lot about Vietnam veterans saying they never came home. And that's true, because what we came home to was not anywhere near what we left. The world, the country, the people, everything was changing on a yearly basis. I mean, it was literally a change, a vast change. The people you came home to didn't understand what you went through, didn't want to talk about it. You had a lot of anti-war stuff going on. It was so bad that when we got to Oakland, we got into Oakland at 4 o'clock in the morning. It normally takes 5 or 6 hours to get out, and in this instance, I was getting out, being discharged. I didn't get out of the Oakland base until 8 o'clock, and there was a reason. There were people demonstrating outside. We were ushered out through a side door. We were not allowed to go out the main door. We were made, quite frankly, made to feel like fugitives. The military suggested that we not wear our uniforms, even though if we wore our uniforms, our plane tickets were discounted. So we all wear the uniforms and went home. The interesting thing, there were probably 30 or 40 of us heading east who all got on the same plane at 10 o'clock at night I think we were out of San Francisco airport, and all on the same plane going to New York. We got on the plane, and this was really our first contact with civilians at this point. We all got on the plane, and we were in a rather happy frame of mind because we were out of the service. We were going home. One of the stewardesses apparently was not very pro-war, and she started mouthing off at some of the people I were with, and was not very pleasant. It became such a problem that the pilot had to come out and made her sit, and she had to sit at the front of the plane and not talk to anybody for the rest of the trip home. This was our first contact, and this really continued probably for the next, 30 years. People did not want to talk about the Vietnam War. Items like the Legion and the VFW provided us with free membership when we got out. They were one-year membership. You could go to any post. What happened is that when we did go to those posts, they were almost as bad as the remainder of the population. They did not want to talk about the Vietnam War. They didn't want us to talk about it. It became a very uncomfortable situation, to such a situation that I think the veterans that I've talked to who went through this time frame had pretty much the same experience of really not talking to anybody about anything that had occurred for a long period of time, except when they got together among themselves. It was like you were a part of a different population, a different time frame. Getting a job was somewhat difficult because I had 2 years on my resume that said I was in the Army. Over the next 15 years, I got 3 jobs. I did all right. I got a job with IBM. I got a job with Sun Oil Company, and I got a job with a private individual. But in each case, the person doing the hiring was either a reservist or a National Guard member. I interviewed a lot of times without getting jobs, except for those 3 times. And that was the nature, I think, of what was happening with a lot of the Vietnam veterans, and why it has continued to be a problem ever since. They were never accepted. Very simple. You were never accepted by anybody, and it remained that way.
Well, you said you spent years not talking about your service, and then something changed.
There wasn't.
Can you tell us
There
what's
was
changed?
There was no. It wasn't a matter of not talking about it. It was a matter of nobody wanted to talk about it. Nobody. Mm-hmm. I hear a lot of people say, "Well, my husband doesn't want to talk about his service time or whatever." The reality is nobody wanted to talk to you about it. Okay, I mean, I had hundreds of pictures and slides and whatever, and I never showed them to anybody. Nobody ever even looked at them. Nobody wanted to look at them. It wasn't a case of I didn't want to show them. It was a case of they didn't want to look at them. Mm-hmm. And it was true of everybody, your relatives, etc. I mean, it just was the case that nobody wanted to talk about whatever had occurred. Mm-hmm. It was very strange. I mean, it's a very, very strange time frame. It was a strange time for people, and the people and the veterans that went through the time afterwards didn't get what they deserved. That was the real problem. I will say that, I spent 2 years in the service. I was a draftee. I had 2 years of service. I got out slightly early. I went from private to an E5, specialist E5, which was fairly extraordinary. My CO, and I've, in the last 40 years, I think probably the last 10, I finally talked to people I was in the service with on the internet. So we have at least had some contact, and that's the first time I've had contact with them in a long time. But I found things that I didn't know, one of which was when I came home, my CO sent my wife a very nice letter thanking her for my service and telling her what was, coming home, etc. What I found out is that nobody else in my company ever got one of those. I mean, this was a man that I got along with very well, but I didn't know that I was that friendly. I also found out that I got a Army Commendation Medal, which it's not a Bronze Star, it isn't a Silver Star, it's not a combat thing. It's a decoration given for service that your CO believes was above it. What I found, I was the only one that got one. So I assume that whatever happened there, I did all right with. But the coming home was different. As I said, the world changed. I mean, the world was spinning differently.
You told me something about...
I went to a class reunion maybe 10 or 15 years later of my high school class. And what I found out is that my world was not the same as their world. They grew up differently. I was the only one in my class who was in Vietnam, who really was in the military. Most everybody at that point, we were kind of a tipping point where people before didn't go in, people after did. And I found I had nothing in common with them. I mean, it just, what I wanted to talk to, they didn't. Wasn't their fault, it wasn't my fault. The world had changed, that's all. I was in a different world than they were.
You told me something about Facebook had made a difference, that you connected
Well,
with.
Facebook is an interesting, they have set up, I found on Facebook one guy had set up an area of his which covered the 222nd Personnel Service Company, which was my company. And because of that, we were able to start some of these discussions, etc. There is now another one called the Long Bihn site, which covers the area where we were stationed. So you're seeing, and everybody has pictures, and we're swapping pictures and etc. There was another one really within the last several months. Facebook has started these I grew up in sites where I grew up in Bellingham, I grew up in my case, I grew up in Ipswich. The site in Ipswich, I put on there, something came up and I put on there about Vietnam veterans, and within a period of probably 5 hours, there was something like 180 replies to the thing on that particular situation, and all basically saying pretty much what I'm telling you now about the world changing and how they weren't there. It was really interesting to see that quicker reaction and how many people were sitting in, and this is in 2013. I mean, it's just interesting that this whole situation is carried through for that long a period.
Right. We have one last picture of the wall that you, is there anything else
The
you
wall.
want to tell us about?
That is a very interesting situation. My wife wanted to see the wall after it was put in. I didn't. I'm not sure why. It's hard to describe seeing the wall. I was there in '67. There are, in the middle of the wall, there are the wall as it's built goes down. You have this peak in the middle and then it goes down. The middle is basically comes into the time frame when I was there. Between the year that I was there and the area through the next Tet offensive, had over 14,000 names on it, which is the largest casualty list of the thing, of the time frame. It's difficult to see those many people and those many names and know that, in my instance, I had a fraternity brother who was there. There were two nurses whose names were there, female, who I didn't know. I didn't know they died there, but I found out who died there in February of '67, November of '67. It was striking. It's very, very different. I've been back there, I think we've been back 3 times. And it's very emotional. Strange.
Thank you so much for sharing these
You're welcome.
stories with us. And I believe this concludes this interview with Bruce Lord, who was in the U.S. Army in Vietnam. And this concludes this taping of the Bellingham Mendon Veterans Oral History Project.
Thank you.